The envelope in my purse felt heavier than the Glock 19 I carried during my brief stint in private security, and it was infinitely more dangerous. My father, Frank Miller, sat at the head of the mahogany table, carving the Sunday roast with the surgical precision he reserved solely for me, never for his finances. The air in the dining room was stale, smelling of overcooked carrots and old resentment. "Tyler needs the capital, Elena," my father said, not looking at me. He slapped a thick slice of beef onto my brother's plate. "It's an investment. A visionary idea." Tyler, 26 and currently on his third gap year after failing out of state credentials, smirked. "Crypto mining is the future, El. You wouldn't get it. You're too risk averse." "I'm an actuary, Tyler," I said, my voice steady. "I calculate risk for a living, and borrowing $50,000 against the house equity when the market is cooling is not an investment. It's suicide." My father dropped the carving knife. It clattered against the china, the sound sharp enough to make my mother flinch. She sat silently to his right, shrinking into her cardigan, a ghost in her own home. "Your brother has potential. He has drive. You?" He scoffed, picking up his wine glass. "You have a job, a boring job. I have a career, Dad, one I built without a cent of your help." That was the trigger. It always was. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And look where it got you. Alone, working 60 hours a week staring at spreadsheets. I told you 10 years ago, and I'll tell you now, no daughter of mine needs college. You should have found a husband, settled down, and made yourself useful. Instead, you wasted 4 years and my patience." There it was, the line. The mantra that had defined the last decade of my life. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply took a sip of water, felt the cool liquid slide down my throat, and reached into my bag. "You're right, Dad," I said softly. He blinked, surprised by the capitulation. "Excuse me? You're right. You decide what happens in your house." I pulled the envelope out and placed it gently on the table, right next to the gravy boat. "But there's just one small problem with your plan to refinance for Tyler's crypto farm." "And what is that?" he sneered. "You can't refinance a house you don't own." To understand the sweetness of that moment, you have to understand the bitterness of the decade that preceded it. 10 years ago, I was 18 and holding an acceptance letter to Wharton. It was my ticket out of our suffocating suburban orbit. I had the grades, the extracurriculars, and the ambition. He was in the garage, polishing his beloved 1969 Mustang, a car he loved more than his children. "No," he had said, not even looking up from the wax. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, the money is for Tyler. He's going to take over the business one day. Men need degrees, Elena, or capital. Women need security. You go to that school, you'll just rack up debt, meet some guy, get pregnant, and quit. It's a bad ROI. Grades aren't everything, it's about potential." He stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. "No daughter of mine needs college. If you want to go, you go. But you leave this house and you don't see a dime. Not now, not ever." So I left. I packed 2 bags, kissed my weeping mother on the cheek, and walked out. I didn't go to Wharton. Without his cosign, the loans were impossible. I went to the state university 3 hours away. I worked the graveyard shift at a logistics warehouse, loading trucks until my hands bled. I slept 4 hours a night. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in finance and real estate law. I didn't go home for Christmas. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. When Tyler got a DUI, I didn't bail him out. When Tyler dropped out of college to become a DJ, I didn't comment. I just worked. I moved to Chicago and landed a job at a distressed asset firm. My job was specifically to hunt down bad debt, find the leverage, and turn a profit. I became a shark in a pantsuit. I learned that the world doesn't care about fairness. It cares about ownership. And I kept tabs on Frank. My father was a man who believed his own hype. He was a general contractor who cut corners. He bought toys he couldn't afford to impress neighbors he didn't like. He leveraged everything, always robbing Peter to pay Paul, assuming that the next big job would cover the spread. 3 years ago, I noticed a public filing, a lien on the family home. He hadn't paid his property taxes in 2 years. Then 6 months ago, the big one. He had taken out a predatory second mortgage to cover a lawsuit regarding a collapsed deck he'd debuilt. The interest rate was criminal. He was drowning, and he was too arrogant to admit it. The bank he used was a regional one, currently looking to offload toxic assets to clean up their books before a merger. I knew the vice president of risk management there. We played squash on Thursdays. I formed an LLC. I called it Nemesis Holdings. I bought the note on my father's house for 60 cents on the dollar. Technically, for the last 4 months, I had been the bank. But Frank didn't know that. He just knew he was sending his checks to a new P.O. box in Delaware, and then he stopped sending checks. He was 3 months in default. In our state, that meant I could trigger a foreclosure, or, since the terms of the predatory loan he signed were so aggressive, I could exercise a deed in lieu clause he had likely signed without reading. Back at the dinner table, the silence was absolute. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly, counting down the seconds of his reign. Frank stared at the envelope. He didn't pick it up. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and rising anger. "What are you talking about?" "I bought this house in 1990. "You did," I agreed, slicing a piece of roast beef on my own plate. It was dry. "And then you took out a second mortgage 6 months ago with Liberty Regional. High interest, variable rate. You signed the house as collateral." Tyler laughed nervously. "Dad, what is she talking about?" "Shut up, Tyler," Frank snapped. He looked back at me. "I'm handling that. It's a bridge loan." "You defaulted," I said calmly. 3 months ago. You stopped paying. You thought you could float it until the spring contracts came in, right? But the contracts didn't come in." His face went pale. "How do you know that?" "Because Liberty Regional sold the debt. So, they sell debt all the time. I just pay the new guys." I was going to write a check on Monday. "No," I shook my head. "You weren't. You were going to refinance the equity to give Tyler 50 grand for crypto. But there is no equity, Dad. You're underwater. And the new debt holder isn't interested in your checks anymore. They accelerated the loan. The full amount is due immediately. You can't know that." He slammed his hand on the table. "Who do you think you are?" It was a formal notice of default and a copy of the deed transfer. He scanned the paper. He looked up. "Who the hell is Nemesis Holdings?" Turned to the last page, the signature line for the managing member. He flipped the page. I watched his eyes scan down. I watched the moment his brain processed the signature. Elena Marie Miller, Managing Director, Nemesis Holdings, LAC. "And since you failed to pay, I exercised the clause in your contract. As of yesterday morning, the deed is recorded in the name of my company. This is my house, Dad. You're just guess." Tyler stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You bitch. You stole our house." "Sit down, Tyler," I said, not raising my voice. "Or you can pack your bags right now. I know you don't have anywhere else to go." Tyler froze. He looked at Frank for backup, but Frank was broken. The patriarch, the king of the castle, had been dethroned by the one subject he deemed worthless. "Why?" Frank asked, his voice trembling. "Why would you do this?" "We're family," I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Family? You told me no daughter of yours needs college. You told me I was about investment. You cut me off. You let me starve while you waxed your Mustang. Well, Dad, I took your advice. I didn't rely on you. I went out, I learned the system, and I won." I stood up and walked over to the head of the table. I stood next to him. "You have 2 options," I said. He looked up at me, looking older and smaller than I had ever seen him. "Option 1, I evict you. I can have the sheriff here in 3 days. You lose the house, the equity, everything. You retire in a one-bedroom apartment in the bad part of town. My mother let out a sob. Option 2, I continued, looking at my mother. You stay, but the dynamics change. First, the house stays in my name. You live here as tenants. If you are late by one day, you're out. Frank's jaw tightened. I will not pay rent in my own house. Not your house, I reminded him. My house, second condition. Tyler moves out immediately. What? Tyler shrieked. Where am I supposed to go? You're a man with drive and potential, I mocked. Go mine crypto. Go find yourself, but you're 26 and you're a leech. You have until midnight to get your things out. Frank, do something. Tyler yelled. Frank didn't move. He knew the math. He knew he was broke. Third condition, I said, looking down at my father. You're going to apologize. Not for the house, but for what you said 10 years ago. You're going to admit you were wrong. You're going to say, my daughter is the smartest person in this room, and I was a fool. The silence stretched. It was agonizing. His pride was warring with his survival instinct. His face turned purple, his knuckles white. I got that double quotes he started, then choked. I'm waiting, I said, checking my watch. I have a flight back to Chicago in the morning. I need to know if I'm calling the sheriff or not. He looked at the deed in his hand. He looked at the walls of the dining room, the wallpaper he had picked out, the chandelier he had installed. He realized that the bricks and mortar meant more to him than his dignity. You're the smartest person in the room, he gritted out through clenched teeth. And I was a fool? And you were a good investment? No, Dad, I leaned in close, whispering in his ear. I wasn't an investment. I was your child. You just never knew the difference. I plucked the deed from his hand and put it back in my purse. Rent is due on the 1st. The wiring instructions are in the envelope. Don't be late. I walked toward the door. As I passed Tyler, who was standing there, mouth agape, I stopped. Oh, and Tyler, he flinched. The Mustang in the garage. The title was used as secondary collateral on the loan. I tossed a set of keys I'd swiped from the hook in the hallway earlier. They landed in the center of the roast beef, splattering gravy onto Frank's tie. I'm taking it. I've always liked that car. I walked out the front door into the cool evening air. Behind me, the house was silent, save for the sound of Tyler starting to cry and my mother finally pouring herself a glass of wine. I got into the Mustang, the leather seat creaking as I settled in. I turned the key and the engine roared to life, a deep, aggressive growl that shook the frame. My dad was right about one thing. No daughter of his needed college. Because college teaches you how to work for people. Life taught me how to own them. I shifted into gear and didn't look back.